prison guard shoved a black man to his knees, his boot pinning the man's collarbones to the concrete. The room laughed. The cameras didn't. Seconds later, they learned who he really was. The chain-link gate rattled like a snake's warning as the sally port sealed, and the night air turned to recycled breath. Fluorescent tubes hummed overhead, harsh and unflattering, bleaching the color from faces and from mercy. In the intake bay of Red Cedar Federal Prison, a line of new arrivals stood ankle-chained and wrist-cuffed beneath a stenciled sign that read, "No phones, no excuses, no heroes." "Eyes down," barked Sergeant Cal Rourke, a white man with a clipboard and a grin that came easy when someone else was small. "Hands where I can see them." He walked the line like a man picking fruit, thumping shoulders, checking tags, enjoying the way power made people flinch. When he reached the last man, a middle-aged black man with gray at the temples, straight back despite the restraints, Rourke looked him up and down. "What are you smiling at, preacher?" Rourke said. "You about to find religion here." The man wasn't smiling. He was steady, almost calm. He wore state-issue pants but a crisp white shirt someone had missed when they traded out his clothing. There was a scuff on one shoe that shouldn't have been there, and an ink stain on his finger where a pen had recently leaked. He tried to speak. "My name is," Rourke shoved him. Not a push for safety, a shove for show. The man stumbled. The chain snapped taut, and the room chuffed with chuckles that sounded like tires on gravel. "You'll speak when I ask for your bedtime story," Rourke said. "On your knees." The man went down, not from weakness, but because he had decided not to rise to this fight. The concrete printed its grit into his palms. Somewhere behind the glass, staff on break leaned closer to the window. In the corner, a young guard with a buzz cut pretended not to look, then looked anyway. A trustee mopping the floor froze, the mop's dirty water making a moon around his shoes. "Hey, Sarge," he started, then swallowed the rest. "Don't," the man on his knees said softly to the trustee. "Not for me." Rourke planted his boot on the man's collarbone and leaned just enough to make breathing a negotiation. "You hear that?" he said to the room. "He gave me permission to carry on." Someone snorted. Someone else looked down at their hands and wished the scene would end. It didn't. "Not yet." "Sir," the man said, voice even. "Please call the warden." "Warden ain't on call for tourists," Rourke said. "Say your number." "I don't have one," the man replied. "You do now," Rourke said, and bent to clip a temporary ID band around the man's wrist. He didn't read the name the man had spoken earlier to the transport officer, which sat silenced in a confiscated leather folio now locked in a gray bin. He didn't notice the embossed seal on the folio. He noticed only what he wanted to notice. The chain-link gate rattled again. A gust of night air slid across the floor. In the glass, a reflection. A man on his knees, a boot, a grin, and a sign that promised no heroes. They had no idea who he really was. That morning, Judge Isaiah Cole had signed 3 orders before breakfast. He was a federal judge out of the Eastern District, known for opinions written in clean lines and paragraphs that held like bridges. He took long walks before dawn, the kind that made the air taste like pennies and pine. His clerk said he had 2 speeds, silence and sentence. He wore simple suits, collected fountain pens, and never signed his name in a hurry. On his docket that week sat a habeas petition from an inmate named Devin Maris, a case Isaiah had been thinking about since spring. Something about the record didn't add up. An alibi that had been buried in footnotes, a public defender who'd aged 20 years over the course of the trial transcript. The judge wanted to see Maris's eyes. He wanted to hear him speak, not by video, not through a packet of exhibits, but in the place that caged him. So Isaiah asked the warden for a site visit, quietly to avoid theater. "No entourage," he'd said on the phone. "No fuss." The warden, a competent woman with tired eyes and a memory for every lawsuit the place had weathered, agreed to a simple walkthrough and a brief conversation in the chapel. Simple. until it wasn't. On the two-lane road that ran past Red Cedar's East Field, a state transport van had blown a tire and kissed the ditch hard enough to jar teeth. Nobody died. 2 men bled. Protocol did what protocol does. It swept up the nearest human shapes and carried them to the nearest hard room. In the confusion, someone took Isaiah's ID with his folio and, trying to be helpful, handed him a set of navy trousers while his own were checked for foreign materials. A radio crackled. A gate opened. A line formed. Suddenly, the judge was an intake body with a face and a voice that asked for the warden and got a chuckle. The marshals who usually shadowed him at public events didn't know he'd come alone today. The warden, stuck in a lockdown drill 2 buildings over, hadn't heard the right name over the wrong channel. So Isaiah did what he'd done his whole life when the world mistook him. He breathed. He cataloged. He watched. When Sergeant Rourke walked toward him in the intake bay with the grin of a boy who owned a magnifying glass and a colony of ants, Isaiah made a choice. He would not meet swagger with thunder. He would hold his ground by giving none. He would remember the trustee's face and the young guard's twitch and the way laughter had sounded like a dare. He would let them write the page. Then he would edit it. The line shuffled toward the steel table where ring folders, inventory sheets, and zip bags waited like a lesson. Rourke performed for his backdrop, the buzz-cut rookie, a nurse who rolled her cart closer than she needed to, a pair of kitchen workers passing through with trays they didn't need to carry. "Show me your wrists," Rourke said. Isaiah extended his hands. The temporary band glowed white under the fluorescence. "Name?" Rourke asked, pen poised, smirk coiled. "Isaiah Cole," he said. "Cute," Rourke replied. "Like the prophet. You preaching already?" "Like my mother's favorite book," Isaiah said. "Please call the warden." "Please," Rourke echoed and scribbled Cole I on the line. "You'll want to save that kind of language for the parole board." "Sergeant," said the nurse, not lifting her eyes, "his shirt's not uniform." "Neither is his mouth," Rourke said. He hooked a finger under Isaiah's collar and tugged in a way that was both impersonal and personal. "Lose the tie." Isaiah undid the knot with fingers that had signed warrants and dismissals and death warrant reprieves. He laid the tie flat on the table. It looked like a river cut from midnight. Buzzcut cleared his throat. "Sarge," he said, eyes on the paperwork. "This guy, he's not on the manifest. He's not on any—" "It's a lockdown intake," Rourke snapped. "Everybody's on the manifest." He wasn't shouting for safety. He was shouting for the feeling of being obeyed. The room winced. A trustee, 40 if he was a day, with hands that shook less than they had 10 minutes ago, lifted his mop and set it down with care. He met Isaiah's eyes and found in them a posture that wasn't submission but restraint. The trustee nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Isaiah nodded back. The mop water slid toward the drain, drawing a thin gray arc. Rourke put a hand on Isaiah's shoulder and pressed again, just enough to ensure the hierarchy was felt. Rourke turned to the room. "Listen up," he said to the other arrivals. "You come in here with ideas about who you are, the place will sand those down. We run on the same rules for everyone." It was a sermon, and sermons tell you more about the preacher than the congregation. "Do you know why I came here today?" Isaiah asked. "Because you broke something," Rourke said, "and now you're in my house." Isaiah studied him. "Not yet," Rourke laughed. "You trying me?" "Sergeant," Isaiah said, and there was a weight in the word that didn't come from a badge. "You're trying yourself." The line swallowed a breath. The nurse finally looked up, mouth opening around a question she didn't ask. The rookie shifted his weight. In the glass, a pair of staffers stopped pretending and just watched, coffee halfway to lips. "Get him processed," Rourke said, almost cheerful now, the way a man smiles when he believes the path is downhill and he is wearing roller skates. He held up a disposable razor. "Lose the beard." Isaiah's hand lifted reflexively toward his jaw. It wasn't much of a beard, salt and pepper and stubborn, but it had been with him through 1,000 difficult days. The razor hovered like a threat, not for hygiene, but for humiliation. "Stop," Isaiah said. "Or what?" Rourke asked. "Or you'll regret it," said a voice that wasn't Isaiah's. For a moment, the room stilled like the pause between thunder and rain. The voice came from the doorway. Deputy Warden Elena Ruiz, hair in a severe bun, tablet in her hand like a shield. She had walked briskly the moment a clerk, finally thinking to open the leather folio in bin 17, heard a thump in her chest when she saw the gold embossing. United States District Court. She'd sprinted past 2 checkpoints, her badge catching the light in a way that made guards move without asking why. "Sergeant Rourke," Ruiz said, "remove your foot from Judge Cole's chest." The room made a sound, small, human, and very old, the edge of a gasp. Rourke hesitated, confusion wrestling with pride. The rookie's pen slid off the page and made a comet of ink. Ruiz didn't repeat herself. She didn't need to. Rourke's boot retreated like a tide that realized the moon had other plans. Isaiah rose without hurry, one hand on the table for balance. He adjusted the cuff of his shirt with that small care people pay to dignity when others have tried to steal it. "Your Honor," Ruiz said, breathing hard now that she'd stopped moving. "I am deeply sorry." Every sound in the bay sharpened. The buzz of the lights, the rustle of paper, a cleaning cart's wheels squeaking for oil. The nurse stood straighter. The trustee lowered his mop like a flag after a long parade. Buzzcut's mouth opened as if to speak, and then decided, wisely, to let silence do the talking. Isaiah inclined his head, not to accept an apology he hadn't yet heard in full, but to mark that what was wrong had at least been named. "I requested a quiet visit," he said. Ruiz nodded, shame and anger tightening her voice. "And I failed you. We failed you." Rourke found his words like coins in the pocket of a coat that suddenly belonged to someone else. "Judge or not, he came through intake. He gave me lip. He gave you his name," Ruiz said. "And even if he hadn't, you will never place your foot on the chest of any human being in this institution again. Do you understand me?" Rourke's eyes flicked to the glass, where the staffers stood frozen. The faces, the ones he liked to imagine were his audience, now looked like witnesses. "Yes, ma'am," he said, a fraction too late in a tone a fraction too low. Ruiz turned to Isaiah. "Your folio, sir," she said, extending it with 2 hands like a sacred thing. Isaiah took it. The leather was warm, as if it had been held close to a body. He opened it. His ID looked back at him with the same tired face he saw in the mirror on nights he read too long. He slid the card into his breast pocket where it belonged. "I came to speak with Mr. Maris," Isaiah said. "If it's still possible." "It is," Ruiz said and swallowed. "In the chapel as requested." "And Sergeant Rourke?" Isaiah asked quietly. Ruiz straightened. "He'll wait outside," she said. "And there will be paperwork." "Good," Isaiah said. "There should be." The rookie found his voice at last. "Your Honor," he said, hands shaking now. I'm sorry." Isaiah looked at the young man with an eyes of softness that made the apology heavier, not lighter. "Learn from what you saw," he said. "All of it." Then he walked past the table, past the razor, past the smirk that had died on Rourke's face, and into the corridor that smelled faintly of old wood and disinfectant, toward a chapel where the lights were kinder. The chapel held 30 chairs and a cross that doubled as a coat hook during winter. Someone had placed a vase of plastic flowers on the piano. Their dust looked like frost. Isaiah sat with Devin Maris for 40 minutes and asked the kind of questions that find the thread hiding in a tangle. Who was with you? Who can say? What did you fear? When did you decide not to run? Maris's answers came halting at first, then steadier, like water that believes the pipe might carry it somewhere worth going. When they finished, Isaiah asked the chaplain to give them the room. He wrote in longhand for a while, the scratch of the pen steady as breath. The order he drafted wasn't lightning. It was a key, narrow, shaped, and meant to turn exactly once. Back in the intake bay, the atmosphere had changed like weather. Word had done what word does, thrown itself against walls and slipped under doors. Staff stood straighter. The trustee found a chair. Rourke stayed planted where Ruiz had asked him to wait, eyes storm dark, jaw working on a mouthful of pride he couldn't swallow and couldn't spit out. The warden arrived then, the kind who carried authority like a steady drum, no need for symbols. She listened. She read the preliminary report Ruiz had typed with her thumbs on the way down the hall. She stepped into the bay and faced Rourke. "Sergeant," the warden said, "you're relieved of duty pending investigation." "You can't," Rourke began, and then, realizing he was speaking to the one person who absolutely could, stuttered to a halt. "I can," the warden said. "Hand your badge to Deputy Ruiz, then wait in my office. If you leave the building before you're debriefed, your status will change from relieved to terminated." Rourke took off the badge he believed had made him a man and discovered it had only ever been a mirror. He handed it over. Ruiz didn't look triumphant. She looked tired. Isaiah returned from the chapel with his order in an envelope, the seal pressed with the force of someone who believed in paper when it was written with care. He spoke quietly with the warden for a moment, then stepped to where everyone in the bay could hear. "I did not come here to make a scene," Isaiah said, voice low but clear. "But a scene was made, not by me." He held up the envelope. "I have directed, temporarily and pending hearing, that intake procedures be reviewed for compliance with constitutional standards regarding dignity and physical restraint. Effective immediately, no staff member will place a foot or knee on the torso of any person who is not presenting an imminent threat of harm. Effective immediately, this facility will implement a name verification protocol that requires 2 independent checks before assigning a temporary ID. Effective immediately, training will include a module on professional language and implicit bias, designed by the Federal Judicial Center and delivered by people you cannot intimidate." He looked around the room until his gaze rested on the trustee with the mop, on the nurse, on the rookie. "And effective now," he said softer, "we are going to do better." Rourke snorted, a small sound, the kind a man makes when he believes the room still belongs to him. Isaiah turned. There was no heat in his voice. "Only wait." "Sergeant Rourke," he said, "you treated me the way you likely treat many. I will not decide your fate today. That belongs to a process I trust. But I will say this, if your power depends on someone's humiliation, it is not power, it is a crutch." Rourke's eyes flashed, then fell. He looked for an instant like a man who had been shown himself in a mirror that wouldn't fog. The warden cleared her throat. "Your Honor, would you like to address the staff more formally?" Isaiah shook his head. "No speeches," he said. "Just work." Work followed. The U.S. Marshals were notified as a courtesy. An internal affairs file thickened like dough. The training calendar shifted. The rookie requested the bias module twice. The nurse wrote a memo about intake fatigue and was surprised when someone read it. The trustee's transfer request, ignored for 6 months, found a signature. Paperwork can be the slowest justice, but sometimes it's the only kind that sticks. Before he left, Isaiah walked to the glass and tapped. The 2 staffers who had watched earlier stepped out, sheepish. "What you witness is what you own," he told them. "It's not enough to be better in private." They nodded, both embarrassed and relieved, as if someone had finally said the rule they already knew. In the parking lot, the night had thinned to a gray that made the fences look like string. Isaiah stood for a moment beside his car, hand on the roof like he was listening for a heartbeat. Deputy Ruiz came out, breath fogging in the cool. "I know an apology doesn't fix it," she said. "No," Isaiah said, "but it's where we start." "I'll see you at the hearing," she said. "You will," he said, and the look they exchanged held a promise, not of perfection, but of attention. In the weeks that followed, the story grew legs and wandered through the county. People told it over coffee and at barber shops and in union halls with hand-lettered signs on the walls. They put their boot on a man, someone would say. A federal judge, someone else would add. But the part worth remembering wasn't the title. It was the way he'd stayed calm when the room went small. It was the way he'd asked for the warden instead of the war. It was the way the rules bent toward dignity when someone with power chose to use it like a level instead of a lever. Sergeant Rourke sat through interviews that felt like his skin had been replaced with paper. He had to explain the jokes he'd told and the habits he'd loved, and he discovered how thin they were when held to light. He had a chance, if he wanted it, to learn the difference between order and control. Men do change, sometimes, but not because they are shamed, because they are seen clearly and asked to meet the sight. The rookie learned to write names carefully. The nurse got 2 new hires on her shift and a promise kept to replace the flickering bulbs over the intake bay. The trustee got moved to a unit with a window that looked west. In the chapel, Devin Maris waited for the hearing that would decide if the thread Isaiah had found was strong enough to pull a life back into place. Justice is slow until it isn't. And the judge, well, he went back to the long bench and the longer work. He signed orders with the same pen and walked before dawn just the same. But there was a new crease at his mouth, not from bitterness, but from a vow. He'd seen again how quickly people forget the names they don't want to learn. He'd seen how easy it is to claim same rules for everyone while breaking the only rule that matters, that everyone is someone. Old men like me will tell you this in the voice we save for truths that fit in a coat pocket. Respect doesn't come from titles. It comes from how you treat people when you think no one's watching. Be the kind of person who calls the warden when the room is going wrong. Be the kind who lays down the razor and picks up the roster and reads the names slowly, like blessings. And remember, every bay is a courtroom if we're brave enough to carry justice into it. That was the moment justice began.